Hello, folks. How's everybody? Today, I hope you're doing better than me, as always. Well, I'm too old to do better than I'm doing. Um, Today, I have a little bit of a special show. I'm going to be doing a little bit of politics, history. Not that I like to do that online. I have to do it only because the other day I talked on JF's program, JF Gariepi, and we talked about the flat earthers. Some issues came up. Some people put some comments. I want to address some of those comments. And I want to address those comments for two reasons. One of them is a lot of people out there think I'm an agent of the United States and I get paid by the United States government in way, some way or thing. Uh, and the other one is it's got to do with flat earthers. They are primarily conspiracists. 99.99% of what they talk about are conspiracies. Okay, why can't you do that? Because the government does that and so on, and they're feeding us this information. We have the Illuminati and all that kind of stuff. And so, I'm not a stranger to conspiracies. That's when I want to set the record straight here, and I got to do it with some kind of video at some point in time because I want to be able to reference it, and that of course falls to you as well. You can reference this video as well in the future, right? Okay, so what am I saying when I say I'm a conspiracist? That's what I think people would label me. If you disagree with the official version the United States puts out on different events that happen through history, well, then you are by definition a conspiracist. That's the word that's used. That's a derogatory term that's used to say, oh, he's just a conspiracist, like dismissing you outright because you don't agree with the majority. That's essentially what it comes down to. It's almost like relativity. You don't agree with space time, well, you're a conspiracist. They don't call it a conspiracist, they call you a crank or crackpot. Well, in politics, it's known as a conspiracist. And just like I'm a crank or crackpot in the world of mathematical physics, I'm a conspiracist in the world of politics. And that's what the flat Earth is all about. It's almost 100% conspiracy. There's nothing else in the entire flat Earth platform or whatever they offer, right? Okay, so let's go down here. The United States would like you to believe that it's got a pristine democracy, that for 200 years since the revolution, it's always been, by vote legally. One party came up, the Democratic Party, then the next year or next election, the Republicans came up there, and they want to show you that there was a continuity and everything was done normally, legally. That's not my view. Okay, I want to set the record straight on that, at least from my point of view, and only just to show you that, it's not like I'm defending it like these people say, and you'll see in a minute, that I'm somehow paid by the U.S. government. I'm working for the U.S. government in some way, that I have ties to the CIA, FBI, or whoever. Um, no, I want to dispel that. Even a lot of these people are trolls, but I want to dispel that even for people who are not trolls. I want to set the record straight on that, and that's what this video is going to be about. So if you got something better to do, well, don't do it. Stick around. Um, no, the U.S. does not have a pristine democracy. Never had. It was more like, I would say, like third century Rome, where there was a Caesar one day, and another the next day he was killed by the palace guards, his Praetorian guard, and another guy took over, and then he was killed or murdered by his wife, poisoned. The usual stuff, normal stuff, normal human stuff. U.S. History is exactly the same. It's no different. And to think that people just went up there with votes and there were no coup d'etats, that's, in my opinion, far fetched. It just never happened in human history. Okay, any country for that matter. There's always been problems in every country. And so here are the comments that some people made. Let's start with that. See, some people said, "Are you getting paid to attempt to deceive people?" And again, flat earthers. Some of these are trolls. Okay, whatever. Bill's not a guy to trust or believe. Just look up his wiki. He's a shill. Okay. Don't know if Bill Gates bought and paid for as well, but wouldn't be surprised. He's a CIA puppet for sure. Okay. And someone said, you sold out. Okay, and then someone made a comment there that kind of gives us an introduction to today. So, where do we find your theories on Assange, Snowden, and the presidents you mentioned? Which I mentioned a couple of cases, JF's program. I'm interested in knowing your thoughts on these men. Okay, so that's what I want to do today. I want to give you a little rundown. I'm going to try to go swiftly through it because there's quite a bit of history in U.S. history, and I love history. It's my drug. That's my drug. That's the one I shoot in my arm. I stay away from history books because when I start one, it's like I can't stop. I got to read it completely. I'm just a fan of history, and I'd rather do physics. The other one is kind of like a hobby, you know. Anyways, what do I think of some of these incidents that happened in U.S. history? Well, I'll give you my version. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with me. I'm just giving you my version so that you can put me squarely within a conspiracy box, if that's what you want to do. Okay. So here goes. Okay, we got Mr. Lincoln. He's the first guy who's assassinated, 1865. Guy who's blamed for it is Mr. John Wilkes Booth. Okay, actor. Okay, he's the assassin. Do I doubt that? No, I don't doubt that. I think John Wilkes Booth is the guy who pulled the trigger. Was he the mastermind? That's where we disagree. The mastermind's a guy that's very seldom mentioned in relation to Lincoln's death, and that's this fellow here, Edwin Stanton. He was the Secretary of War. Okay, Lincoln's Secretary of War. And yeah, he's the guy who I think orchestrated the assassination of Lincoln. Okay, now why do I think that? Well, I think that because there are certain let me get here. There are certain questions here, certain facts that I see in history, and this is the rundown. Stanton was in control of. It was called the Secret Service, but in October of '64, he told Lincoln that he wanted to protect him. You need protection, kind of thing, and so Lincoln rejected that, but eventually they did put a man to protect him, especially at the theater, Ford Theater, where he was assassinated. Stanton also infiltrated the house of William Seward, the Secretary of State, and it turns out that Andrew Johnson and Seward were both moderates. Okay, and so these two were on the hit list. And the question is, why would the moderates be on the hit list? And by moderate, I mean people who wanted to kiss and make up with the South, who wanted to pardon, the secessionists and say, okay, come on, let's be brothers again. And people like Stanton, they didn't. They wanted harsh treatment of the South. So the politics did change with the assassination of Lincoln, and it would have changed with the assassination of Andrew Johnson, of course, also of William Seward. Stanton put the news out the next day that Jeff Davis was responsible. Why? Because he wanted to deflect attention to the real culprits. And the issue here is, this standard practice of people who do false flags, they immediately try to shift blame on someone who is hated, who people will buy quickly. In this case, Jeff Davis, who was president of the South. He insisted on a military trial. 8 people were tried, 4 were hanged, and it was all run by him. He selected the judges and the defense attorneys. And the defendants did not get to talk. Their lawyers talked for them. And he withheld Booth's diary until 1867, when there was a second inquiry by the Senate. The U.S. Senate investigated the Lincoln assassination. The first one, they said, okay, because they wanted to get to the bottom of whether Jeff Davis was really responsible. See, Jeff Davis was caught a couple of months after the war ended. So they had him in prison. Now they were going to charge him with Lincoln's death as the mastermind. After 2 Senate investigations, Jeff Davis was cleared. And that took all the way to 67. By that time, everybody forgot about things, just like standard old stuff that you see in the United States. Okay, that's the way I see it, anyways. So yeah, I think Edwin Stanton, and there's a lot more. I'm just giving you a really quick synopsis of why Edwin Stanton was the murderer. James Garfield, another coup d'état. Okay, he was assassinated in 1881. Who was the murderer? Well, this guy was charged. Charles Guiteau. He was a stalwart Republican Party. He spoke in New York together with Garfield as part of the campaign to get the Republicans reelected. Okay, and Charles Guiteau, I think he was a little out of his rocker. Okay, and I do think he was the assassin. It's not that I'm questioning that. Who is the man behind the plot? I think it's this man, Roscoe Conklin. Okay. Why? Because Roscoe had an axe to grind with Garfield. He was the New York City party boss, and specifically, he ran the port of New York and received all the money that came from that operation. 75% of the imports into the United States came through New York, and this is the guy who ran it. And what happened was, when Garfield went to New York to get his help to get elected, they did some horse trading. And one of the issues that Conklin raised is that he wanted to remain as the head of the Port of New York, and also, to be able to put another stalwart as the vice president, which was Chester Arthur. Okay. Well, it turns out that when Garfield got elected, he did not rename Conklin to the Port of New York. So what Conklin did was he quit his Senate seat to show that he had the votes of the people, that people would put him back in power. And it turns out that people did not reelect him. So he lost not only the Port of New York, he lost the Senate seat, and he was a very bitter individual. And unfortunately for Garfield, he was also a very powerful individual. He was kind of like the J. Edgar Hoover of those days. He was the man behind the throne, and so he had a lot of influence, a lot of power. Uh, how it went about, I can't tell you for sure. All I can think of is that he had a talk with Guiteau. They knew each other. They were both party stalwarts. They were both from New York. Okay, they both talked on the night that Garfield talked in New York to the crowds. So they were all there. They knew each other. Okay, and this is the guy that's going to assassinate the president. Now Guiteau was a little off his rocker. Why was he upset? Well, because Guiteau thought he was responsible for the election of Garfield. He said, I made you president. That's what he thought in his head. And so he went to Washington to get a job. So in those days, you would go into the president's office. They lined up with their resumes, I guess. Said, well, what do you want to be? And he wanted to be the ambassador to France. And Garfield said, okay, don't call us, we'll call you. And he never called. So these two guys, both Conklin and Guiteau, their, uh, they never got what they wanted. And that's the reason Guiteau went out there and apparently murdered, shot Garfield in the back at the train station, and I think Conklin was responsible for that. Incidentally, both Conklin and Chester A. Arthur were taking the train to New York City from Washington D.C. I believe, or from Baltimore, one of those two. They were taking the train to New York City when Garfield was shot, and when they arrived, the telegraphs had already given the story to the reporters over then. They were waiting for them at the station. Here's the two stalwarts coming, off the train, and they said, "Oh, Garfield was shot. Oh, how interesting." Anyways, I think Garfield was responsible for that, for party boss, obviously. William McKinley, he was shot by this guy, Leon Chalgosh. He was an anarchist. I don't think there was a conspiracy here. I do a lot of research on these things. I don't see anything in this case. If anything, it happened in reverse. The United States did the most to go after anarchists. They arrested Emma Goldman, who is known as a prominent anarchist that was steering especially the workers, and her lover, which was another anarchist, Alexander Berkman. And these guys, they were eventually put in prison during the First World War, and eventually kicked out of the United States for inciting people not to register for the draft. Okay, and so if anything, the conspiracy went in reverse. In this case, they simply took some of the it took the moment to see if they could get rid of a lot of anarchists out of the United States. Okay, Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, he was there was an attempt on him in 1912. The man who attempted to kill him was this fellow. He shot him in the chest. The bullet remained in Roosevelt's chest for the rest of his life. Schrank was, I think, off his rocker. Also, I think he was a lone gunman, and he spent the rest of his life in an asylum. He died in the asylum. Okay, another one, Warren G. Harding. He was, I think, murdered. Okay, 1923. Person who did it was his wife. I think she poisoned him. Okay, why do I think that? Well, there's lots of stuff. I mean, Harding's administration was considered one of the most corrupt that there ever was in the U.S. government. It was run by what it was known as the Ohio Gang. A lot of people from Ohio that were buddy buddies with Harding. You find a case of this gentleman who was the first secretary of the cabinet, right, to go to prison for sticking his little hand in the cookie jar. He gave some oil contracts without bidding to some of his friends, and that turned into a big mess. But why do I suspect good old Florence? Well, there's many reasons. Florence, it was a convenient marriage of convenience when they got married to begin with, and that's what her father told her. Said, she was 5 years older than Harding at the time, and her father said, this guy's just marrying you for your money. And that essentially is what it is. Yeah, Harding was known as a womanizer, so he went around, did his things, and that's one of the issues. But the other issue is, that towards the end, they really fell apart completely, their marriage. And of course, that's always hidden from the public, and you get this pretty picture of how well they got along. But the main reason is she prevented an autopsy of being done on the president. And he lingered like 3 days with some kind of stomach problem, and there was no autopsy. And the way I look at things is you're guilty until you're proven innocent if you're the government. The government is always guilty until proven innocent. Why? Because they have the power to shut things down, to control from up there. That's why they're guilty until proven innocent. And if something is not crystal clear, to me, that's already extremely suspicious. That's what a detective looks at when he's looking at a crime. If he sees that kind of stuff, immediately he has suspicions. And that's the case here. When Florence said, I don't want an autopsy done on my husband, well, I don't know. I have a problem with that. Sorry. Okay, so we don't know what killed Mr. Harding. Okay. Franklin Roosevelt, another Roosevelt, he was shot. He was just shot by this gentleman, Italian immigrant, Joe Zangara. And the only issue, I think he acted alone. I think he's just a lone gunman. That's what I really think. But there was an issue of whether he intended to shoot Roosevelt or the man who died that day, which was Anton Cermak, and he was the mayor of Chicago. They were in Miami, by the way. And it could have been a mafia hit by this fine gentleman, Mr. Al Capone. He hated Cermak's guts because Cermak was getting involved in, he was persecuting the mafia as best as he could, I guess, right, in those days, with the corrupt cops and everything. And I guess there is a possibility that Capone may have wanted Cermak out of the way. So maybe the intended target was Cermak. A couple people testified to that. They're not believed, so it's up to you, to find out what really happened that day. But Zangara shot like 5 people. One of those was Cermak, and he's the only guy who died. and it turns out that he was hated by the mob. So I don't know, it's a little iffy there. Okay, more to these days, we got good old JFK. We know how he died. This man killed him, right? Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, that's what a government wants you to believe. Who are the real murderers, as far as I'm concerned? Well, it's this guy, Mr. Johnson, and of course his buddy. Not so much buddy, but I think they work together well. Okay, and I think they're responsible also for the killing of Robert Kennedy, as well as Martin Luther King. Okay, I think all these were done by these two gentlemen. Okay, possibly even Marilyn Monroe. I think also she died in mysterious circumstances. She was I guess, a one-time girlfriend of JFK as well. So maybe they did her as well. At least it seems like to me. So too many things wrong with JFK's assassination. The car's pulled out, taken to Detroit immediately to be refurbished. You don't do that. You keep these things for as evidence. And of course, if there's going to be no inquiry and you know already who did it, then why hold the evidence, right? So that's what they did. They just took the car out. They took Kennedy's body out of Parkland Hospital. They took it to the Naval Hospital where in Annapolis, where they had control. You know, they did all these little things. They murdered Oswald to shut him up. He said he was a patsy. And interesting, he didn't say he was innocent, right? That is interesting because he said he was a patsy. Now you can interpret that word in two ways. Either he was a patsy, like, I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time, like, they're robbing the bank. They come out and give you the bag and the gun, they run away, and you get caught with the bag and the gun. You say, no, I had nothing to do with it, that kind of thing. That's one way of interpreting patsy. Another one is you're part of the deal and you were used as a scapegoat. And maybe that's what happened to Oswald. Maybe he knew something, maybe he don't. We did. Maybe we won't know today. For sure, Jack Ruby said, the people who put me in this situation. And that does make you kind of think, right? I mean, you should investigate that if you haven't done so. Anyways, I think Johnson murdered, by the way, through his right hand man, his enforcer, Malcolm Malcolm Wallace, who also his fingerprint shows up in the sixth book depository, right? But he murdered a guy when Johnson became president. When he became a governor of Texas, and then 1 year later, the governor pardoned him. So here was a guy who murders someone. He goes to prison, and then the new elected governor, pardons him. Now, what do you think of that? And then Johnson's on record saying he murdered the two brothers in Vietnam, the president and his brother. Okay, so he said, yeah, we hired two thugs, and we had them killed. And he says that, on a microphone. Okay, so Johnson was not, a stranger to murder. Okay, so to kill one more guy or two more guys, like in the case of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, yeah, just more routine work. That's all it is for a politician. What else do I have here? Okay, then we have, some not murders, but, we have the sinking of Titanic, I think was an operation carried out by the British. There were like 200 Americans there, and that's the only reason Titanic might be considered, also an American held, an American operation or agreed to with some Americans, because some people pulled themselves off the ship, rich people, especially one guy, I can't remember his name, but he had a lot of art and he was going to transport it, and he decided to get off the ship. So that's a little suspicious. The Lusitania also, it was carrying material to Britain during the war, 1915. And the Germans had put an article in the newspaper saying, you're risking your life if you travel on a British ship, right? Because they're using those ships, passenger ships, to carry weapons. and we're going to sink them. So don't travel on them. And they did anyways. They put this little article only where nobody could see it in the newspaper, and a lot of people traveled and they died when the U-boats sank the Lusitania. Um, so yeah, I think some of those were false flags. Again, you got to look at it in detail to see. I'm just going over them real quickly. Um, Famous false flag, we have Pearl Harbor and Gulf of Tonkin. The United States has essentially admitted Gulf of Tonkin never happened. They just Johnson created it as a pretext for war. Okay. And obviously, the more important one recently, 9/11. Okay. That's obviously, in my opinion, a U.S. government operation. Um, Anyone who knows a little bit of physics, you don't have to be an expert in physics to look at Building 7 come down and realize that it's controlled demolition. Now, maybe some people say there were nuclear weapons underneath the ground. Well, I'll even concede that. Fine, okay. So they put nuclear weapons. I don't care if they want to go that far. That's fine. The point is, Bin Laden didn't have nuclear weapons to put underneath the building. So whether it was controlled demolition or nuclear weapons, it really doesn't matter. The point is that all these buildings came down through controlled demolition, and and when you realize that, you know who did it. It's just that simple. Anyways, whether you agree with me or not, that's what I believe in. Okay, that's the point I'm trying to make. And then the ongoing operation here, we've got Assange and Snowden. These two are U.S. government-run operations. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, I studied Julian Assange in quite a bit of detail. I was going to put a video out on him. I lost my data one day, and so I said, "The hell with it." I just didn't go back to get it done. I wrote a little article on Quora, so that's the title of the article. You can look it up. You can see my reasoning in the case of Assange primarily. Okay, but yeah, these are false flags, both of them. They're named as the leaders of the opposition, essentially. If you are a conspiracist and you believe that the U.S. government is doing this and doing that, well, that's why they said, well, we're going to put Assange in charge of convincing you that you got to follow him. So they named the leader of the opposition. Now they've got all these two bozos telling you what to believe in if you suspect something of the U.S. government. So it's especially good for flat earthers. If you're a flat earther, you're going to follow Assange. He's going to take you directly to hell. That's what he's going to do. Anyways, that's my take on these guys and on U.S. history. So now, what do you think? Do you think people would label me a conspiracist? So I'm not a stranger to conspiracies. Now, would I be telling you this if I get paid by the U.S. government, by the CIA, by any of these organizations? I think I would tell you something different. I would give you the party line. That's the first one. The second one is I would not have just 5,000 subscribers. I'd have maybe millions of subscribers. I mean, Assange is on the news every day, so is Snowden. And Rupert Murdoch has to make sure of that there's an article on these guys every day. And that's how you know it's a false flag operation also. Do you know April Gallup? Do you know Willie Rodriguez? You might say, well, who are those? And well, those are the people who blew the whistle on 9/11. Willie was taking people out of the basement of one of the towers, helping people. He helped like 21 people into safety. And George Bush gave him a hero's medal. And it turns out later on, Willie figured out that, what they were saying was not what he saw. He said there were explosions in the basement. So he came out and he said, look, I don't believe that all these people died because of bin Laden. I think something else happened here. And April Gallup, she was inside the Pentagon. And she said it wasn't a plane that hit. She said there was a bomb inside the area where she was in. They killed a lot of people, she said, and she was thrown, way across the room. She had her 2-year-old, I think, baby with her, and a toddler, and she said she was blown out. So these were, people say, well, if this was a false flag, why don't people come out and say it? Well, people did come out. We just didn't pay attention to them. We forgot their names, and Rupert Murdoch's not going to put their names on the news every day. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, all these are false flags operations, and that's why I don't pay attention to politics. I don't do politics at all. I haven't done it in many years. I like history, but I don't do politics. I really don't care about politics anymore. But so for people to blame me and say that I'm receiving money to mislead you on issues of science, that no, NASA must be paying me maybe to say, no, yeah, man went to the moon, and yeah, we do have the space station in space, and we have all these satellites that communicate when it's really all done with balloons and underground cable, you know. Come on. Okay. Anyways, let's get on with it. Here we have what are some of the problems with the flat earthers? Okay, a little summary here that I put. Okay, and so what are the problems? Well, the first problem is that they don't do science; they do politics. They talk about conspiracies, and I just talked about conspiracies, right, in politics. And JF asked me, so is there a difference? What arguments would I use against one of these people? Who say, oh, well, look, the government doesn't allow us to know this, and it's feeding us information there. Well, one thing is, if you take JFK's assassination, how many hours did that take? I mean, it took a minute. Everything happened so fast. Some people went to the grassy knoll. Others were pointing to the uh, sixth floor in the book depository. Cameras were stolen. Things happened so fast. It was just a 1 day job. So was 9/11. It was a 1 day job. Few hours, we're done, right? And when you look at NASA has ongoing things every day. They have all these people working there. Um, they're trying to get in some projects out there in space. And like I said, the Russians beat them to it, beat them to space. They had the first dog in space, the first uh, live entity in space, Laika. Had the first man in space, that's Gagarin, Yuri Gagarin. And they had the first woman in space, Tereshkova. Okay? So in those three instances, they beat the United States. Did the United States say, no, that's all false flags, all those are false operations? No, the United States was worried. They said, look, the Russians have beat us to space. What's next? Are they going to have better weapons than us? Are they going to shoot us down from space? So it was Kennedy who started the Apollo program to say we're going to be the first ones to put a man on the moon. When they did, when Armstrong hit the moon, 1969, I believe, did the Russians say, now that never happened? That's a false U.S. false flag. That they did that in Hollywood. No, the Russians had to tip off their heads and say, okay, they beat us to the moon for whatever it's worth. I'm not saying it's a great accomplishment if we didn't do anything but bring rocks back. I think to a great degree we did some good things, especially regarding pressure. The vacuum level we measured there and some other things, the solar wind. But if you say, well, why did we go to the moon? Just to bring some rocks back? That's it. If you don't think it was a great accomplishment, well, fine. Okay, so it wasn't a great accomplishment, but that doesn't mean that we did not go to the moon. And if you're just going to say all these photographs are faked, it's all baloney, well, I don't know. What you're questioning is many years worth of investment, not only of investment, but stuff that lots of people verified. This is not like a one-shot deal like when Robert Kennedy was killed or Martin Luther King was killed. These conspiracies are a little more believable because it happens so fast and it happens once and it's out of the way. But here you have an ongoing project. If you look at the whole series of Apollos or at the shuttles and so on, to deny this is almost like denying that the Earth is a globe. The flat earthers rely on biblical evidence. In fact, a lot of where it came from, the whole flat earth notion came from 19th century people, or I think it was the early 20th century, where it was religious folk who wanted to enforce, their Bible. They wanted to say, hey, the Bible says something different, and it's all these scientists out there who are saying that the Earth is round, but we have no proof. And here we have Scripture, Holy Scripture, written by God, right? And it says something else. And so it did start as a religious movement. And today, well, yeah, a lot of people who may not even be religious join the movement because they not because they believe in the Bible, but because they believe in conspiracies, and they believe the government is has all these conspiracies out there that now they're bringing them into science and saying, all of science is a conspiracy. And regarding that, I can tell you only one thing, that I don't like the mathematical physics physicists. I believe they run a very tight operation. They try to sell you their theories, and they don't allow you to publish something that criticizes them, especially from a physical interpretation point of view. In other words, from what they call philosophy, they dismiss that as philosophy. They say, and that's not important. What's important to us is the equations, the technology we can develop from this stuff. So do I think mathematical physics is a conspiracy? And I know a lot of people will hit me for this. No, I don't think it's a conspiracy. And I'll tell you why. There's a difference between a conspiracy where you deliberately go out there and say, well, I'm going to murder this guy or whatever. That's one issue. But that's different than saying, look, and I'll give you an analogy. You're a carpenter, okay? And you built the best looking table in the world. It's the strongest thing ever built. You used oak or whatever, or maybe tailored the wood with something and say, I've got the strongest, most beautiful table on earth. Okay, and you're a carpenter. And now you go over to the metal guys, to the blacksmiths, right? And the blacksmiths say, what do you got? Well, I got this table. Look, it's made out of wood. It's stronger than your steel and blah, 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 blah. And blacksmiths say, well, we're not interested. Huh? What do you mean? Look, this table is solid. Look, it's beautiful. It's better than anything you got here. We're not interested. We do metal here. Okay? And this is the same situation here with the mathematical physicists. They do mathematics. They do equations. So I come in there and I say, look, I've got a better theory than you do. I think that what you have is all irrational theories. And they say, we're not interested. But why aren't you interested? Here we do math. The physical interpretation, we don't care about that. That's philosophy. What we do is math. That's what we do. That's what we publish. And if you don't come in here and publish some equation, you come here with your kindergarten pictures, we're going to kick you out. Is that a conspiracy? No, I don't see it as a conspiracy. It's just the way they do business. That's their club. That's what they publish. That's how science has evolved. If you don't like it, well, you got to form your own club. What can I say, right? And so in that sense, no, I don't think there's a conspiracy there, and I don't think there's a conspiracy in NASA against the flat earthers, okay? But the issue I've got with the flat earthers, that last point, they have no physical interpretation for gravity. Okay, let me give you some examples. I went to a couple sites because, everybody says, oh, I'm a flat earther, I'm a flat earther. Okay, great. So you're a flat earther. What's your theory? Well, they have a million theories, and they're all irrational, right? And so here you got from two sites that I went to. These are the most prominent sites. One site says, what is gravity? Gravity as a theory is false. Love that, because false is an opinion. We don't care if it's false or true. We want to know the explanation, the mechanism. Objects simply fall. No kidding. Why do they fall? Why don't they fall upwards? Why don't they fall to the sky? I mean, why do they fall towards the ground? Because one of the notions that they have of gravity, if you have a steel ball, you let go of it, it weighs more or has more density than air, and so it falls to the ground. Right, why does it fall to the ground? Why doesn't it fall to the sky? That's what they got to explain. Okay? In the flat earth community, there are several theories as to why this happens. Okay, let's hear them. Some attempt to explain this with use of mechanics like electromagnetism, density, or pressure. Others make use of traditional mathematics such as the infinite plane model, and others a new look at the problem, such as the non-Euclidean model. Okay, and what are all these models? What is certain is sphere Earth gravity is not tenable in any way, shape, or form. Okay, and so they say, is the Earth accelerating upwards? No, this is popular theory among some small groups to explain gravity, but it is problematic at best. The Earth is stationary. We are not whizzing about in space at 67,000 miles per hour or at speeds accelerating towards the speed of light. You go to the other side, which is just as prominent. It says the Earth is constantly accelerating up at a rate of 32 feet per second squared, or 9.8 meters per second squared. This constant acceleration causes what you think of as gravity. Okay, so as you can see, these guys, everybody's got their own flat Earth theory, and the real way to look at this is the following. Is because gravity is the issue. They don't talk about light. They don't talk about magnetism. They don't talk about electricity, the structure of the atom. They don't care about any of that. So they don't deal with those issues. They just deal with gravity. Because the issue is, if it's flat Earth, then how do you explain gravity? And that's how gravity gets sucked into the picture. Okay, so how do they explain gravity? Well, some people say the Earth is accelerating. Okay, and the problem with that is, if the Earth is accelerating today, we should be traveling a gazillion times the speed of light. Okay, that's one issue. We don't even know how fast it is, and all the stars and everything has to accelerate with us, because every night you wake up and you see the same stars out there in the sky. Okay, and the sun is there and the moon is there, so I guess they're accelerating with us. So everything's accelerating. Accelerating from what? What are we leaving behind? Empty space. What's pushing our Earth upwards? Okay. So the other guy says, well, no, I don't believe in that theory. I believe in a different theory. Okay, what's your theory? And again, it's the density. You take the ball, it weighs more than air, it falls to the ground, and things just fall to the ground. Period. Well, that's like saying, well, gravity is gravity. That's it. You haven't explained the mechanism. Why doesn't the ball fall to the sky? That's what we want to know. Okay. I mean, why does a balloon go upwards? Why does a ball fall down? And they say it's an issue of density. So here's an experiment for them to think about. You have a steel wall. It's a thought experiment, okay? And make it as big as you want. You got a steel wall on your left, okay? And you got something less dense on the right, some gas, okay? But they're not up and down, they're sideways, okay? So you're out there in space, you got a steel wall on your left, and gas or liquid or something less dense on your right. You let go of your steel ball. Will it fall through the lower density, or will it fall to the steel wall? Well, Newton says it falls to the steel wall, okay? Because mass attracts mass. You have these two big masses. Well, the big mass and the little mass is going to attract it towards the bigger mass. Period. We're done. So it's not an issue of density. You can't explain this with density at all. Density simply violates what we observe. One guy put a link to me, and I thought I'd show you this. Supposedly he says, "Oh, here, the answer to all your questions," okay, kind of thing. Okay, let's see what this guy is proposing. He says the following. He shows this little picture. These are a series of things. He's saying, look, what you got here is, think of this pendulum type thing at the amusement park, okay? And the Earth and the sun all rotate, right? So you have a certain acceleration there. And only if there's a change in acceleration will you notice that you're moving, that something is moving, in the Earth. But we don't feel that, we don't feel that our feet are moved. When the Earth moves, if it's accelerating around the sun, it's rotating and so on. Well, we don't feel any of that. So he says, here's proof that the Earth cannot be ball, first of all, and second, that it's not going around the sun, because it would have to accelerate. If it's going in a circle, it's constantly accelerating. And if it's accelerating, you would feel something. That's again this notion that people have, that you prove theories Okay? And that comes from mathematical physics. They're all into proof, in evidence. They want to be convinced. And again, that's their job. These people are not into the business of explaining a mechanism objectively. They're in the business of recruiting. And so what they talk about is conspiracies, right? And then they go into these things where they say, well, you can test it for yourself, so that you believe, so that you come into our religion. We're going to show you that it can't be a flat earth. Um, well, they go through all this stuff about acceleration. And one of the explanations from that video, the one that I wanted to mention, is that they get this guy, I think he's a British guy. He goes on a train, right? And he says, look, I'm sitting here and I don't feel any movement, because I'm traveling as fast as the train. So I don't feel any movement unless the train suddenly stops or accelerates, right? And here's my hand going in the direction of the conductor, right? Well, my hand is moving faster than the train at this moment in time. And the hand can also move backwards, okay? So now it's moving slower than the train, okay? It's a very simple experiment, something that you could say you can test for yourself. Well, this guy misses the point. The point is, the point is that before we do any experiment, on the train, before you move on the train, before you get into a car and say, well, let me prove this to myself, let's see if it's true. And before you do any of that, what you got to explain why you get stuck to your seat before you do any motion. Okay? You're standing on the train, you jump, you come back down. And the question is, why do you always come down? Why are you being pulled to the bottom of the train, not to the roof of the train? That's before you do any experiment in moving hand motion. You're already stuck to the ground, to the floor of the train. And the question, why don't you float? Why isn't gravity upwards? That's the issue. And unless you can answer that question, we don't need to do your little experiment of moving or talking about dynamics, about motion, about the earth going around the sun and accelerating and decelerating. We don't need any of that. We need to ask you only one question. When you stand on the earth, why don't you float? Why don't you start flying off into space? Why are you pulled or something pushed? If you want push, fine. Why are you stuck to the ground? Why, when you jump, you come back down again? You don't have to jump, but the point is you're stuck to the ground before you do any motion. And so that's what they got to explain. You got to explain the mechanism of gravity, what keeps you stuck to the earth. And with a rope model, if every atom on earth is connected to you and you're connected to every atom on earth, we can explain that quite easily. Anyways, that's a wrap. I just wanted you to know that, if you're going to talk politics, you could call me a conspiracist, but don't tell me I'm being paid by the U.S. government. You can't have it both ways. I can't be paid by the U.S. government and tell you that all these were conspiracies, because that's not the official policy or the official version of the U.S. government. The U.S. government says, John Wilkes Booth is the guy who killed Lincoln, and we have Charles Guiteau, he's the guy who killed Garfield. That's the way we want it. We want you to believe we have a pristine democracy, and sometimes you get all these weird lone gunmen who come in there and shoot the president. Oh, so sad, and then another guy takes over, but we maintain this legality. No way. I don't buy that. Okay? And again, you don't have to agree with me. All I'm saying is anyone would label me a conspiracist, so the Flatearthers cannot tell me that I'm not a conspiracist I'm not a conspiracist on one hand and I get paid on the other. You can't have it both ways. And again, one of the reasons I suspected Assange to begin with, okay? Two reasons really. The first one was that he said that 9/11 was done by bin Laden. That's when I started researching this guy. I said, something's wrong here. And the second one is that, he came up in 2007 and suddenly he gets money, from God. He starts flying all over the place. He starts traveling. And so, this guy really started getting some money from somewhere. And again, you got to follow the money trail. That's not the case with me. I only have, a few thousand, couple thousand followers in YouTube. If the CIA was funding me, believe me, I do a lot. I'd be a little more successful than that. Okay. And I'm not in the news every day like these guys. So, anyone who raises that issue against me is just avoiding the issue. The issue is you got to explain gravity. Explain it without any conspiracy theory. Don't tell me what they're preventing you from seeing or the photographs that are fake. Don't tell me any about that. I want to know the mechanism of gravity. If you got a mechanism of gravity, put it down exactly how it's done, and we'll be glad to tear it apart because it's got to be nonsense. Okay. We'll see you on Sunday, and have a good weekend. Bye bye.